Wow, Anekantavad, there's a lot of ways I could pronounce your name. Thank you so much for making a video response to my video on treason, on democratic ethics. Now I want to say, first of all, I haven't seen a lot of your videos. I've seen a few of them, but you know, I'm not inclined to see why ethalists are depressed. You know, video 75. You know, that's just not. Give me a subtitle or something. Same thing with vegetarianism. I'm pretty well versed in issues relating to vegetarianism, and as you may or may not know, I'm not here to convince other people of things, but to find out the kinds of things other people believe. And so sometimes I feel I know, and if you enter the conversation, it might take me a while to notice the specifics. Right, so just so you know, I'm not that familiar. Your video starts off.
The late 18th century. Interesting time in our history as a species. It's often called the Age of Revolution.
Let's try that again with a better volume, huh?
The late 18th century. Interesting time in our history as a species. It's often called the Age of Revolution.
Yes. I find it interesting that for another century after that, revolution tried to break out and we didn't help very much.
The French and the American Revolutions.
So that's the subject. First, the American Revolution, which you characterize as idealistic and looking or inherently taking advantage of unique situations.
The American one says, given that we now live in this new land that is relatively secure, we now have an opportunity to develop a society that is closer to the ideal. We have unique advantages.
So, okay, now the thing is so far that I like the kind of question you're asking. I don't mind, and again, I haven't watched a lot of your videos, so I'm not like, you say later that people might complain that you make these kind of comparisons. I like this kind of comparison. So I think it's best if I nitpick the comparisons that you do make.
In other words, we're pretty much immune from invasion. We have enormous advantages in terms of social cohesion.
So I disagree with that. Now I might be biased, having recently finished Walter Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin, who tried to create a social cohesion and did succeed to a certain degree, but also was, you know, thwarted by all the natural impediments to such a goal. And immune from invasion, that's not true at all. We were very prone to invasion from Canada, from Indians that might be, you know, that had alliances and might be supplied by a foreign nation. So I disagree with that.
I suppose, as a more perfect union. It was enormous idealism that
was it idealism or was it
perfection?
I think it was more narcissism. Like, I think Benjamin Franklin had a certain idealism. There wasn't idealism in, you know, Thomas Jefferson, and these people had read Locke and whatnot. But I think you could also say that it was narcissism. If you look at the whole group of founders, you can't attribute their views to an Anglo-Saxon perspective. They were the sons and grandsons of original immigrants. Now you characterize the French Revolution.
Across the Atlantic in France, they have their own revolution, which takes a completely different turn. A lot of people say that the turn is essentially the guillotines and the reign of terror and the dictatorship or quasi-dictatorship of Napoleon Bonaparte that resulted, but I don't see it that way at all. I see it as an essentially...
So, I didn't finish that note. There's well, there's just a couple more seconds.
Similar attempt
So you say it's a similar attempt. So what I found interesting, for example, in this biography of Benjamin Franklin, given that he was a diplomat to France for a while, is that the sort of the royally connected people that helped us with our democratic revolution, because in some sense they thought it was a splendid idea and very fashionable, they were all guillotined.
The French seemed to say, given that society is essentially a bunch of competing interests, given that people can act in a corrupt and self-centered way, let's create something that is the closest that we can get to perfection in the real world.
So there was a gap in there, about 30 seconds, that I took out by playing two notes. Because you went on given this, given that. I think there was a big pragmatism in America. I mean, there was a tradesman, a middle class of tradesmen that wanted just to do things in a practical way, that wanted to do things idealistically maybe initially, and then was willing to find a practical way. So I don't find this a totally valid contrast. Now, if what you were saying was that the French had a more cynical view and this negative utilitarianism thing, that's where my view starts to converge with you. I could see that. But I don't think that it's because the French were facing the real world and the Americans were idealistic. In fact, I don't think it's fair to attribute to the Americans an English perspective at all, because people like Benjamin Franklin went over to England as English patriots and found that they were considered in England second-class citizens, and that's just the way that it was. And that realization made them realize that, oh, okay, we have a different view. Like, for example, we're in Pennsylvania and William Penn created this democratic structure. We think that's because the British like that. No. It just happens to be the way the proprietor wanted it. You happen to have a liberal proprietor.
And it's essentially the emphasis is all that really divides the two. The emphasis is the American says we can move towards something where life is better. Life is better in an absolute sort of sense. And that anything in the way of this is frustrating and annoying and is going to make us angry. The French system is, or the French mindset is, given the imperfections of the world that we live in, this is the best that we can do.
So did you see my Misery and Me's video where the 0 point is total satisfaction? So everything's negative from there. And some people could say total desolation and everything's positive from there. But a more statistical approach is to take the median and say, look, that's your average. You're either better than average or less than average, and that's what you measure from. It's totally an arbitrary thing, and you're acting like doing my Misery and Me. I mean, basically the argument that you're making in here, if carried to its logical conclusion, to me seems to argue for Effelism. That all there is in life is misery, and what you do is you ameliorate misery, and that'll make you optimistic. I don't think so. Okay, I don't think so. I think being in the middle and realizing, oh, things are going bad. Oh, wait, things are going good. Having a reference frame where sometimes things could be going bad, sometimes things could be going good, that's the answer to satisfaction. And the brain does that, and that's why you see wealthy kids might think their shit is miserable. By a poor kid's standards, everything's going great, but you know, they're upset because of this or that, or what they did or didn't get, or their mom doesn't spend time with them, or whatever.
American system, or at least the American or Anglo-Saxon or whatever you want to call it, mindset says there's right and there's wrong, and we have to have zero tolerance for wrong.
See, I think you're characterizing the American mindset as an Anglo mindset, and not even an Anglo mindset, but a Puritan or Calvinist mindset. No, that's just a part of America, a third of America. There's Quakers that implemented, like I was talking about, some religious freedoms and a basic liberal attitude in Pennsylvania and elsewhere for an extended period of time. There's just the bandits and outlaws that are over there. You know, there's a whole kinds of people that are driven to go to a place like the New Country. And you're just characterizing it as not only Anglo, but also not quite Anglo, but more Puritan. So the Puritan is distinct from the Anglo-Saxon, and the confusion about that is just the whole Aryan bullshit that there even is such a thing as Anglo-Saxon.
French mindset, or one would almost call it more the continental European mindset, says that there's always going to be wrong. Now what? How do we manage that fact?
See, I think the American pragmatism dealt with the same thing. I think your distinction, while interesting, is not actually valid. I think that what you're calling the continental mindset is a cynical humanitarianism. Again, ironically, something you see in Ephilism, that they're cynical about the possibility, but they're sympathetic to people's pain and stuff. It's like, oh, we'll never figure this out. It's all going to hell in a handbasket, but I'm so sorry for the people on the way. And I don't think that's accurate. I think the American approach has more to do with the belief that there should be this strong middle class, and that the elites and the rabble potentially should be discouraged. Right? You should try to get people in the middle class. And I think the French still had a mindset, and you still see it now. Their empire mindset has a lot more to do with old ideas of class, and that it's good to have rich and poor, and that if you transform yourself to a mercantile society, it's still the same. You have rich and poor. The poor now can become rich. They could never become royal, but they could become rich. Not really, not officially. But they could become rich now as a merchant or whatever, and that you'd still have a class division though. Whereas the American approach is that you have a strong middle class.
This sort of thing, we still manage to do this in spite of everything. I think that, if anything, is slightly more idealistic than the American/Anglo-Saxon view of things.
You think that it's like Camus' idea that the world is absurd and that it's still worthwhile is more idealistic and I guess that's supposed to be strong than the American view that things could be better, but they're not. I don't think so, and I think it depends a lot on your mental metabolism. I take the fact that things are the way they are, but could be better, as a positive thing, that things can therefore be better, as opposed to a struggle against, always inevitably being below an ideal that is impossible, but you're still working towards. I think that's more. It brings more of an emotion of futility to me than the American, what you're attributing as an American view of things could be better. I don't measure the difference between how things could be and how they are and go, that's why life sucks. I go, oh, okay, let's analyze that and see how you could address that.
You're probably tired of me comparing the French and the English mindset in terms of the way that they approach just about everything.
Doesn't bother me.
That the French way of looking at things merits a second look on the part of all us frustrated idealists in the Anglosphere. Look at what we actually have accomplished.
See, I think a look at progress, as long as you have a sense of history, already has that, right? A sense of progress, of American progress, and you look at where we are, you could go, oh, the lifespan is longer. We do have intercontinental transportation, rail, and roads, and we have accomplished these things. Whereas you're saying, well, there's only misery. That's just, a road between Sacramento and San Francisco is just arresting the misery someone would feel of not being able to see their child that moved from San Francisco to Sacramento. And so it's a lesser gain than thinking, hey, people normally didn't see their children that moved 170 miles away or whatever it is, and now they do. We're better off, you see. So I think it's kind of arbitrary the way you're setting this up. It's not how it strikes me.
Applications, even if I'm sort of very sanguine about moral implications.
I had to look up sanguine even though I recognize the word. So it means you're very confident that the moral implications of what you're talking about are good. And I don't think so. I don't think any kind of utilitarianism has good moral implications. I think an artistic philosophy, a philosophy of art, how can artists enjoy themselves in a society? I think that's what's beneficial. Not a utilitarianism, but because that's always a way of discounting someone's view, but a way of saying there's a kind of unanimous consent, that there's a kind of agreement to disagree when there isn't literally what we might classically think of as a unanimous consent. That is where the good moral implications lie. And in utilitarianism, you get ethylism or its opposite, whichever. You get something that number crunches over people, and as an excuse to somehow invalidate the views of certain people that you want to ignore, and it's not necessary. It's possible to incorporate everybody's individualistic view, because there's quite a few things that we really don't need to bother each other about. Cheers.